So a friend of mine once said to me, I wish my mum had a doctor like this. And, that really sums up this book, actually. I almost feel I could just end the video there. It really does sum up this book. The book about getting older by Dr. Lucy Pollock. I bought it in February 2021. The reason that I bought it, so here's the thing. So in 2021, I was starting to do a lot more speaking engagements, a lot more training, etc., around inclusion. I had been working with networks and working on workplace culture way before that, like way before 2020. But obviously, with what happened in 2020 with George Floyd and everything, there was suddenly everybody asking you to come and speak. And I'd not long written my own book, which is in there somewhere. And so organisations were asking me to go and speak about inclusion and all of that stuff. And so I obviously have a library of books, and I was like expanding the library of the books around the inclusion topics, of which there were lots, right, off the back of 2020. But I like to have books that cover all different like lived experiences and, the whole sort of spectrum of lived experiences in the workplace and in society. And there aren't that many books around kind of like, in intergenerational workplaces, the challenges of different generations, the books about getting older. And so I saw this one popped up and it had really good reviews. And I thought, oh, let me get that, So I was really originally thinking about almost like more from a work perspective, that I wanted to add it to my library. But it was so much more. And I don't think I've never recommended this book in a work context. But I tell you, this is one of the books I have recommended the most to my closest friends. Because it almost makes me a little bit emotional, but it's such an important topic that it will affect most people. Well, getting older hopefully will affect all of us, right? So getting older will affect most people. But then also, what the book goes into as well is your role when you are looking after or supporting somebody who is elderly, like, for example, an elderly parent or relative or friend or spouse, right, or partner. So that's why this book, it just, like, this is one of those books that, like, on a human level, is one of those, but it's important on a human level. That's the way I would describe it. A little bit like the other book I would describe like that is Lost Connections by Johann Hari. These are books that are just important on a human level, and that's what this one was. So, it really is about everything to do with getting older. Dr. Lucy Pollock is actually a specialist in sort of like, medicine for older people, geriatrician. I believe she's called, a practicing geriatrician here in the UK. I think she's still practicing. Because of the topic, it's about getting older. It's also about ends of life. It's about dying. It is about all of that. It sounds like it's going to be quite a sad topic, like a really serious and somber. And actually, it's incredibly light and warm and funny, but still having like the serious side of it, like the lessons, the practical takeaways, so many practical takeaways, which I'm going to come on to. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's a book that I recommend so much to my friends, especially my female friends who, especially in like a lot of hetero relationships and in society in general, a lot of the caring responsibility is often put onto the women, especially if you have, if there are mixed gender siblings. I know that a lot of men are doing a lot of caring as well, so I would also recommend it to men, but I just don't know as many, and I don't personally know as many men that are doing the caring, and that's why I've recommended it to a lot of my female friends. But yeah, the one friend that I recommended it to, and if she's watching, she may well remember this conversation. But when her own mum wasn't very well, and I guess sort of just like navigating, this is especially what I think it's good for if you're in the UK, like navigating the healthcare system, how to advocate for a person who is older and needs treatment, etc., needs care, needs looking after. And so I was having a conversation with this particular friend, and she said, oh, I wish, she read the book. And so talking of Dr. Lucy Pollock, the author, she said, I wish my mum had a doctor like that. And it just says it all. Honestly, it's such a treasure. It really is an absolute treasure. In terms of some of the points that I would make about the book then, so as I've said, it's really, it's actually quite light given the topic. I mean, there are some serious elements to it. It talks about some very practical things, which is useful if you haven't yet been exposed to this kind of world in terms of where you are potentially starting to be responsible for somebody else. So it talks about things like power of attorney, as in, so where you have like legal rights to make decisions on behalf of somebody, and the distinction, and I didn't know this before I read the book, but the distinction between power of attorney over health and then other decisions like financial and property, right? Those are two different things, which was really useful. She talks about capacity. So often, when you think about elderly people and you think about things like, for example, dementia or just, forgetfulness or frailty or whatever it be, and thinking about the capacity to make decisions for oneself as a person who is older, it's really important, because when it comes to, for example, medical treatment or where to live, all of those big decisions, right? Whether somebody, God forbid, in terms of end of life, at what point do they not have any further treatment? At what point is a ventilator switched off, for example, things like that? Where should they live, as I say? The book really goes through the practicalities of how you can make sure that, somebody gets the best care, whether that's yourself. So it talks about planning ahead for these things, but also if you're supporting somebody, how you can make sure they get the best care. The other thing that I loved about her as well, and I'm not going to go on a rant about the NHS, because the NHS is amazing, and and the social care system that we've got here in the UK is creaking at the seams. But she talks about, how fragmented the care can be, and the fact that it's not holistic. So you might have an elderly person that, maybe is in hospital, or maybe is just being seen by their GP, and they have like almost like a basket of symptoms, and rather than somebody standing back and saying like, let's have a look at what we think is happening, they get given a pill for that, then somebody else sees them and gives them a pill for that other thing, then somebody else sees them and gives them a pill for that other thing, then they turn up 2 months later and nobody stands back and sort of says, hang on a minute, is there a diagnosis here or something else that's happening? And actually, do we need to treat this differently? So that's really interesting in terms of how she talks about that, looking at root causes. The one biggest lesson that I took away, and I was talking to a dear friend about this who recently supported her aging relatives about this, and it's asking older people what matters most to them. When, for example, they can't take care of themselves, or when, for example, they're approaching that end of life, asking them what are the things that are going to matter most to you is really important, and being clear about what those priorities are so that they can be as happy and as independent and as supported as they want to be, to the end of their life, basically. It's really important stuff. It's a really good book. Honestly, it's a book that I would recommend to everyone, basically. And here's the thing, what was interesting is when I was like pulling together the notes, etc., for this series and for this video, this is an audio book that I listened to, so back in 2021, and I listened to it only once, right? But the amount of information I have retained from it, I haven't even gone through everything that but I retained so much information. And I think it's because the topic is so dear to all of our hearts, right? Because it's something that's going to affect all of us. And it's also quite possibly affecting you in your day to day, So I support members of my own family, like, in terms of like with their care and their needs, etc., and navigating, the healthcare systems and social services systems. So I found it incredibly useful, eye-opening, comforting, all of those things. I'm really gushing about it, and it surprised me because when I was pulling together the ideas for this series, I didn't really expect this book to kind of come out, but this book, like I listened to it and it's kind of really been lodged in my brain. And then obviously, as I say, a lot of conversations that I've had with people, especially people that are like caring for elderly relatives, this is the book that I always talk about. This is the book that I recommend. So I would absolutely recommend it to anybody that's watching. In the comments, if you've read this one, I'd love to maybe just hear from you. What was your favourite take from the book? My rapid review, what would I give it out of 5? Definitely a 5 out of 5. Like, this is a must. This is a life book. This is one of those like life lessons books. My one-line verdict, warm. It's like a warm hug. I use that term a lot. Right, it's a little bit of jargon. It's like a warm hug of a book. That's what I would say. And it's very important. It's such an important topic. Who shouldn't read it? Nobody. Everybody needs to read, because we all want to get old. We all want to get old and have a happy older life when we get to that next chapter. Audiobook, physical book, or both? Well, I don't have the physical book. I think I did buy it, but I probably gave it away in the declutter. In fact, I'm actually thinking of buying it again. That's how I know how much I like this one. I'm thinking of buying the physical book, but I absolutely loved the audiobook, which Lucy Pollock actually narrates herself and does a great job, right? Given that she's a medical doctor. This is why I love when authors narrate their own books. We need to start a campaign about that. Anyway, that is it. That's my take. Let me know yours.